Namaste, and thank you to all our viewers who have joined in. It's a great pleasure to come and talk with Pragna Bharati. So today's talk, like Giridharji said, it's War on Indian Civilization, and my affiliation now is Indology Foundation and Arshavidya Satsanga. So before I start, I'd like to very quickly talk about the antiquity of the Indian civilization. I've talked about this extensively in my older talks, and I've given a couple of images here, the Indian Civilization Untold Story and Revisiting Indian Civilization, among other talks also. So here, I make a point that human habitation in India goes back to a very ancient period of time, perhaps even to 1 million years. And there are ancient artifacts such as cave paintings, petroglyphs, shelters, and other things around 40,000 years, at least, that antiquity. We have archaeology in Virana, Rakigadi, and other things up to about 9,000 years and counting. Our Itihasas seem to have evidence of very ancient dates, and there are several researchers who are trying to uncover the truths. What we can say is Ramayana is at least around 5000 BCE, Mahabharata is at least 3000 BCE. It could be more ancient than that, and there are a lot of researchers working on these issues. And the archaeoastronomy contained in our text seem to show antiquity that is at least as old as around 10,000 BCE in some of the measurements contained therein. So this sets the stage for the remaining talk, where I wanted to show, starting with the fact that the Indian civilization was a pretty ancient one. When we go to look at accounts of war in the Hindu civilization, I'm now interchangeably using the Indian and Hindu civilization. So we see, for example, in the Itihasas, where Rishi Vishwamitra comes to Dasharatha, and he says there are some Rakshasas who are not allowing me to practice my rituals, to do my yajna. They are destroying the yajna, defiling everything with blood and flesh and so on. And he asks them, please send me your son, Ramchandra and Lakshman, and they can come and destroy these demons. So I have put a question evocatively here. Who were the Rakshasas? We don't know. In the reading of Itihasa, these are some kind of supernatural demons with powers and so on. And historical reading might ask, are these people inimically disposed towards the Indic civilization, and who were they? At any rate, it is perhaps the earliest account of war on the Hindu civilization. With that, I'd like to point out something. Religious pluralism with multiple divinities had no history of religious conflict. However, religious war became common with the onset of Abrahamic dogma. Now, even as I'm saying this, I'd like the audience to note that I'm not attacking any religious dogma, any religion over here. It's merely a narration of facts as we see them from history. So there's no intention to hurt anybody's feelings over here. It is merely a recounting of facts. So we see the birth of doctrinal aggression happening in the Genesis, where the snake tempts Eve to eat the forbidden fruit from the tree of knowledge. And the snake says, if you eat this fruit from the tree of knowledge that God has said, don't eat, it'll give you viveka, the power of discrimination. And then you'll realize that you are really divine and you're as powerful as God. Well, the Abrahamic God gets to know this, becomes furious, and expels man from Eden. So this turns out to be, if you were to take a long-range view of what is going on here, the Abrahamic doctrine makes the Vedanta knowledge, Tattvam Asi, thou art that, as forbidden knowledge. And it really marks the rejection of Vedanta. So if you had to be an Abrahamic, you had to reject Vedanta. It stops saying that you are born divine, and rather says you are fallen, you're born in sin. And you require the grace of God to redeem you in the afterlife or wherever. So this story really recounts the birth of a doctrinal aggression against the Hindu civilization. And if we ask, where are the origins of the Hebrew people? History and internal narrations say two different things. The earliest accounts we have for the origin of Hebrew people comes from the Egyptian stele. This is the Memeta stele in 1200 BCE, and this mentions the place Israel. History also says that the Hebrew people were in captivity in Assyria around 700 BCE, and later again in captivity in Babylon from 600 to 500 BCE. And their own traditional accounts say that patriarch was Abraham and Sarai, whose story I don't want to go into now, but very, very interesting parallels with Indic stories. And Abraham's son was Isaac. Isaac's son was Jacob. Jacob had 12 sons, and they became the 12 tribes of Israel, who were scattered throughout the world. And the diaspora is right now the progeny of Jacob. There was a historian, a Greek called Clearchus of Soli. He lived around 4th to 3rd centuries BCE, and he wrote on India, quite a bit on India, and there are fragments of his work that are still available. Flavius Josephus was a historian, a Roman Jew. In this work, Contra Appionem in 122, in the 1st century, he quotes Clearchus, who is in turn quoting Aristotle on the origin of the Jews. And they say Jews are the Kalani tribe of Brahmins from India. So that was the position of Aristotle around 300 BCE on the origin of the Jews. Very interesting accounts are there in Quranic stories, as well as the Old Testament stories that make us sit and ask, did these people have a common origin? Was the rejection of Vedanta the marking of people who became the Judaic faith versus the people who became the Indic civilization? Very interesting questions. We won't go into that right now. I'd like to call out the Hebrew wars that are mentioned in the Old Testament. For example, the book of Deuteronomy, chapter 7, verse 1 to 3 says, the Lord God asks you to drive out many nations, the Hittites, these people, Amorites, Canaanites, Hivites, Jebusites, and God says, you must destroy them totally, make no treaty with them, and show them no mercy. These are very, very interesting in that it shows a God who is doctrinally ill-disposed towards these people. It makes us ask, who are these nations that the Hebrew God wanted the Hebrews to destroy and why? And we have some clues. For example, the Hivites. The Hivites are, for example, the Mitannis, are a Hurrian-speaking people in northern Syria. And many scholars today say the Hivites and the Horites, the Old Testament, are the Hurrian people, the Mitannis, who lived in a place called Canaan. And the Mitanni kings, for example, we know today, I talked about this extensively in my talks. They had Sanskrit names, they invoked Vedic deities in peace treaties with the Egyptians. So just give me a minute when I remove this mark from here. Okay. Why does this not? I have to close this. Okay. So we also know from history that there was an outward expansion from India from at least 2000 BC onwards. In my talks, I've talked extensively about the 200-year drought that was there in India, the monsoon failure. We also know the drying up of the Saraswati with climate change and other things that is around 1900 BCE. And these things led to an outward migration where people went out of India and settled various places where there is water and resources available. For example, the Fertile Crescent, the Nile, Tigris, and the Euphrates rivers. We also have evidence of Indian zebu cattle in Mitanni lands, 1900 BC. Talked about that as one of the evidences, and several other evidences, like I said, the Mitanni people and so on. We know that the people from Lothal, Indus Valley civilization, they used to have trading links with the Dilmun people, where today's Bahrain is, and they had contact up to the Kassites, the Babylonians, and leading on to the Mitannis, the Hittites who were in Turkey, called the Hatti people, and so on. So we know for a fact that there was Indian thought, Vedanta, and other things were widespread in these areas in a very early period of time, which adds to this Old Testament accounts about the Hebrew wars, where their God said, you need to drive out these guys from these areas, destroy them, and show no mercy. So this seems to be, again, a war on the Hindu civilization, going back to an exceedingly ancient period of time. I'd like to show the outgrowth of Abrahamic thought. The first one was Christianity. And there's an example of Christian eradication of Hinduism in Armenia. There is a historian called Zeno of Gluck, who is Armenian. He was a disciple of Gregory, patron saint of Armenia. He says at least 7 Hindu cities were established in Armenia in 349 BCE. And he says they were established by 2 Indian princes from Ujjain, who were taking refuge in Armenia. They worship Ganesha and also Krishna. I've read the actual account, Ganesha and Krishna, and their descendants multiplied and ruled over a large part of Armenia. And they flourished until the dawn of Christianity. It is not until the dawn of Christianity. What happened was Gregory, he led a murderous assault on the Hindus of Armenia in 301 current era, and a genocide ensued where he ordered the temples to be destroyed. Every man, woman, and child who was a Hindu had to be killed. And that was the kind of genocide that happened over there and wiped out Hinduism in that part of the world. And we know Christian assault advanced up to northern Afghanistan, approximately where the Parthian Empire was, and Iraq. And if you look at the map, in India, somewhere onto this side, the eastern side, and you have Iran and you have Armenia sitting here near Azerbaijan and Georgia. That gives you an idea of the extent of the Hindu civilization, how far Hindu thought had gone in those days. This is a well-known chapter in Indian history, and I don't have to dwell at length on this. The second class of Abrahamics who came out of Abrahamic thought, first were the Judaic people, second were Christians, the third were the Islamics. The Islamic aggression on Indian civilization is well known, 701 current era up to 1700s current era. We know of several despots, for example, Bin Qasim, Ghazni, Gori, Delhi Sultanate, Madurai, Bahmani Sultanate, Mughals, Tipu, Nizam, so many others. And we know that their actions led to destruction of temples, the destruction of libraries, institutions, genocide of populations, slavery, including sex slavery, jizya, forced conversions, the suppression of identity, and many, many things that we can talk maybe for an entire day, but many people know this. I don't want to talk about that. In the Conrad Ernst article, Was There an Islamic Genocide of Hindus? He counts, from some accounts, about 50 million plus Hindus were killed during this time frame. So that calls for, that highlights an enormous aggression from Abrahamic faith in the Indian soil itself. Until such time, it is not present day Indian borders. It was outside of India. There was activity pushing back the Hindu civilization into India, and eventually the conquest has come into India itself. Christian Europe also practiced aggression on the Indian civilization. All of us know about the infamous Goan Inquisition. This wood engraving shows how Hindus and neo-converts who practiced Hinduism were burnt at the stake, and the Christian clergy and people watching them. There were destructions of temples by the Portuguese in southern India and western India and so on. We also know about the destruction of temples by the French in Tamil Nadu. We also know about ethnocide by British. This is not a term that people normally use for the British, but in a recent talk, I started using this term ethnocide, and the remaining part of my talk will show how the British practiced ethnocide. And today we know, for example, if you look at this article, that up to 80 million people died in India due to famine and epidemics between 1760 to 1947. Far more than the estimated number from Islamic aggression. The British caused this death. And before one gives a clean chit saying that this famine and epidemics, I'd like to highlight what ethnocide was and how the British practiced this ethnocide. So if you look at the UNESCO Declaration of San Jose in 1981, it says ethnocide means that an ethnic group is denied the right to enjoy, develop, and transmit its own culture and its own language, whether collectively or individually. This involves an extreme form of massive violation of human rights, and in particular, the right of ethnic groups' respect for their cultural identity. So looking back with this clinical definition and what the British did in India, it is clear that what they did was ethnocide. So if we look, how did the British practice ethnocide in India? Well, the orchestration of ethnocide was through at least 5 mechanisms. I called out 5, there could be far more than this. First, the creation of widespread poverty. Second, the destruction of identity via the manufactured caste. Third, the destruction of identity was via the distorted history of India. Then the fourth, the destruction of religion via missionary activity. 5, the starving of Indian languages and the destruction of Indian education systems via the introduction of English. So I'd like to go a little deep in this. Many people ask, okay, India was poor, I think, because of caste system. And how do you say that the British are the ones who created widespread poverty? This is a question I get in some of my talks. So I devote an entire section to the British creation of poverty in India. Here's an image from 1897, where during one of the famines, people begging at the British Army outpost for food. We know about Angus Madison and how he saw the economies of the world from the year 130 to 2003. I've talked about this at length in my past talks, so I won't talk too much, but just highlight that India was a very rich nation in the past, went down gradually during Islamic periods and went slightly up during the Maratha consolidation, and once again rapid decline downwards in the British emptied Indian wealth, at the same time enriching themselves. So he calls out these things. In my talks, I have said how ethnocide has gradually expanded its reach in India, starting with Dalhousie's Doctrine of Lapse, where he said that if the British protectorate dies without a son, then the British are authorized to take over those lands. This goes back to infamous precedents in the Abrahamic literature itself. I won't go into that right now. So one example of that one is in Thanjavur. I talked about this in my talks, how India became poor, and I've shown how the taxation that the British practiced. Before the British took over Thanjavur, Thanjavur had an enlightened taxation of about 15%. Once the British took over, it went up to 56%, impoverished the countryside enormously, causing a chain reaction and a collapse of the economy in every section of society. We know from what Angus Madison says that India was wealthy. The wealth of Indians was not with the church or not with the clergy like in Europe and other places, but it was with the artisans. The artisans and the so-called lower classes, the people who created items of value for the Indian economy, they were the ones who had this wealth, whether it was cotton works, whether it was metal works, whether it was agriculture, and so on and so forth. They were the ones who had this wealth. Dharampal talks about how in India there was a well-developed education system going throughout the country, starting from primary education to higher education. And the reason why India needed so many literate and educated people was the economy was that good. It required skilled people to be artisans and keepers of the commerce itself. You cannot keep commerce if you're illiterate in numbers and other such things. India had need from the village level up to the urban levels for literate, educated population. And Dharampal's writings show before the British came how India was a very, very literate society. Anyway, the British, in addition to all of the things they did, taxation and other things, they also used Indian knowledge to build up their own industrial revolution. And they also prevented India from participating in the industrial revolution. So as a consequence of all of these things, we had a serial collapse of the economy, which I've said over here. Farmers and artisans producing goods of value in ancient India, enormous expertise in agriculture, metallurgy, textiles, and engineering works. The British taxation collapsed the economy for all classes. The Industrial Revolution was underwritten by Indian money and knowledge. The artisan classes were impoverished by unfair trade practices the British had by pushing their manufactured goods in India and preventing manufacture of goods in India. The British education system collapsed the traditional learning and disconnected people from the roots. And in that turmoil, the missionaries came in and they furthered the divide by trying to make divisions of North Indians, South Indians, how Brahmins are responsible for poverty. And so noxious narratives were imposed into the country as part of the practices that we today call ethnocide. One more eyewitness to British creation of poverty is Will Durant, where I've talked about this also in my talks, won't go in detail. He says by 1929, when he left India, the British had incurred a national debt for India of up to $3.5 billion, and the exchange rate being as of 1929. One more scholar today who talked about this, Utsa Patnaik. So she says between 1765 to 1938, the British siphoned off $45 trillion from India. She says there's virtually no increase in per capita income between 1900 and 1946, even as inflation and other things are taking place, meaning a reduction of the purchasing power people, and you know that India had widespread poverty in these times. And she says per capita annual consumption of food grains went down from 200 kg in 1900 to 157 kg in the eve of World War II. And by 1946, it had dropped to 137 kg. And in my talks, I say how this is hiding, the statistic is hiding a lot of social indicators like infant mortality, mental retardation, health problems, starvation, famines. Many, many things are hiding behind dry statistics of this nature. So that was mechanism number one, the creation of poverty. Ethnocide is also done by the colonial conception of this alien entity called caste. India had a fluid Jati Varna system, and that served India as a bedrock for a very, very long time. However, when the Europeans came to India, especially this Herbert Risley, an anthropologist, they used a discredited race science, and they said the ratio of width and height of the nose can be used to classify the race of a person. And they saw so many racial categories in India. As you can see, each of these colors is a racial category. They entrenched caste in the census of 1901, that is Herbert Risley, and he created this many caste, tribe, subcastes, and maliciously, he ordered them by something called social preference, something that did not exist in the past, but when he imposed certain subjective opinions in ordering them the Gazette in India, and that has more or less become entrenched, practiced wisdom to the current date. So a couple of books I like to recommend there, Breaking India, Rajiv Malhotra and Arvind Neelakantan, and also this book by Nicholas B. Dirks on Caste of the Mind that talk a lot about this phenomenon on colonial conception of caste. Ethnocide also was done by distorting history. And one of the biggest things that I talk about in my talks is the Aryan invasion, that in 1500 BCE, Aryans came to India, Dravidians were driven to the south, the Aryans imposed the Vedic religion, and the Brahmins oppressed the Dravidians, and this oppression and the caste system caused Dravidians poverty and backwardness. And today people say Dravidians are separate race and religion. So I see this end result as a failure to inculcate national identity because we don't have a positive narration of history. We are unable to connect to the past because we are all disconnected from our past and we are rudderless today. That is where we are. So while talking about ethnocide, we can also see additional agencies who are allied in distorting Indian history. So we started out with colonial and the Eurocentric, the Europeans who subverted our history. But today that space has been occupied by vested interests, the church and the mosque, and additionally you have corporations, international, multinational corporations and so on, and they have a vested interest in controlling Indian identity. And they are assisted by the liberal academia and the media, which goes and does certain things. And obviously the Marxists today who control the education sector still. So history plus noxious ideologies by each of these agencies over here has resulted in a subversion of identity of the people at the center here. So bigotry and hatred is normalized against the Indian civilization today, and we can have it under the umbrella term of Hinduphobia. So today we see the result. Ethnocide has resulted in the destruction of an identity. People today in India are unable to identify who they are and connect with their past with pride. So because the British have practiced ethnocide in every aspect of our identity, today we have got all kinds of weird expressions of identity. People go around saying, I have a religious identity, that's who I am, or the so-called caste identity, or the Dravidian identity, or regional identity, or language identity. Some people, the youth today, say they cannot connect with anything because they've been so deracinated. So they only say, I have a corporate identity today, or I'm a world citizen. I have nothing to do with any of these things. So in my talks, I said how each of these identities distorts and undermines the underlying framework of unity of the people. Some of these identities are utterly spurious, especially this Aryan-Dravidian divide. So today I'm saying Bharati identity is under severe attack. If you look at a timeline, our timeline at the very ancient past is a Vedic identity, very, very ancient. We have texts, we have got knowledge systems, we've got practices that define the identity of this group of people. Going down into history, we started seeing the Islamic destruction and suppression of the Indian identity, 711 current era, and so on. leading to 1700s colonial distortions, vested interest distortions of the present day, and the Indian government from 1947 onwards, who was a partner in this destruction of identity. So today we see that the identity has been distorted and distortions and destruction is taking place. And at the center of all this is the person who wants to practice his identity as a Hindu. That is under great danger. So this graphic is from Hari Kiranji Vadlamani, and it talks about present day machinations, the identity destruction which continues unabated to the current day. So in this graphic, Hari Kiranji is showing that today there are three main forces. There's a lot to say about this, but it's a very short talk. So we'll conclude by saying there are religious groups today that have practiced victimhood and refined it to an art, and they shout the message of persecution and go about with aggressive proselytization, and they change the demographics of the Indian nation. Then there are academics, media, and NGOs who, under the action of these external agencies, they go through a process of appropriating the Indian identity, the Indian text, and the interpretation of that, and so on is their prerogative, and it is their license that gives value to the narrations that they make about and what is a Hindu and how old is this text and how old is Sanskrit and so on. So for appropriation, through a process of distortion, they go and destroy the identity of the Indian civilization. The government itself, acting with external pressures like Western identity, the narrative of Proto-Indo-European evangelist pressures, and so on, it goes through a process of creating laws that discriminate. The laws are not equal for everybody in India. The majority has got a certain set of rights, and the minority has got a little more rights and first dibs on the land, on the fruit of the land, if you will. The government goes through a process of appeasement, and it infringes on the rights of the people. And all these groups act to get rid of Hindus. And that is the bottom line. Very unfortunate, but we are seeing that centuries of such a work towards destroying the war and Indian civilization has today been normalized in this graphic that we see here. So I'd like to very quickly conclude my talk with exhibits on consequences of war on the Indian civilization. These are random exhibits that I've taken. These are not representative. Well, these are not the main ones. They are merely some representations, random representations. Exhibit 1 I'd like to show is from Mizoram in Wangchia. It is an archaeological site, 2016. So this DNA report in 2017 by Amrita Madhukalya. So she showed that they found Hindu relics at the Mizoram Neolithic site, and ASI made a discovery with sculptures of Ganesha, Kalki, Makara, guarded by the Neolithic menhirs of the lost civilization. So this is a news report that came out. And the minute this news report came out, there was promptly an uprising in Mizoram on identity. This is reported in India Today, as well as in this publication, the Untold Northeast News, Inside Northeast, where it shows the protesters over here going about saying, hello, Christian country and independent Mizoram, and no Hindu relics found at Wangchia, ASI lies. So what this one shows is, when a certain majority takes hold in a place in India, the propensity is to reject their Indian identity and map on to an alien identity. So although the reality is ASI found relics in Mizoram, the current population owes allegiance to Abrahamic faiths and Abrahamic history, and they promptly come out saying that there is no such thing, it is a lie. Very, very disturbing, but this is one of the exhibits I wanted to point out. The second exhibit is a tale of two ASI sites. The first ASI site I talked about in my talks, this is in the Dwaraka, the Gulf of Cambay, where from the CSIR lab, National Institute of Ocean Technology, Chennai, they took a ship and went and did sonar mapping over here, reported in episodes in March 2003. They found a 9-kilometer long feature 40 meters below the sea level and found artifacts that were dated to this time frame. However, this is one of the ASI sites. The second ASI site is in Kerala, and this is from Frontline, which is the front for the Hindu, which everybody knows the disposition of this news media. Muzaris at last. So archaeologists believe they have found at least a part of the ancient port city of Muzaris. This excavation was funded since 2007 by the Kerala government with approval of ASI, and they have gone around trying to show that Saint Thomas is supposed to have come into India via this Muzaris. And so because of interest, Cherian, who's the director of this and the excavation at Putnam, has been heading this particular. The tragedy of what happened is, as soon as this paper came out from CSIR labs, the then UPA government squashed this research. They promptly cut the funding to the CSIR lab, said that is not your mandate to do what you've done over here. So research on Dwaraka was squashed and funding was poured into Pattanam, into trying to see whether this is a real lost city of Muzaris. Just shows the reality of where we are today. It's a question of whose country is it, whose history is it, what are you trying to show over here? Continuing with that story, we see Swami had actually returned to the Prime Minister in 2018, begging literally that we need to continue investigating at Dwaraka based on underwater ruins. However, like you see, the ASI had asked UPA government to fund 14 crores for more research, but the UPA government did not show any interest in doing this. There's another news report that talks about what is happening at Muzaris. So Professor Vasant Shinde, he's a veteran archaeologist from Deccan College. He, as well as others, Dilip Chakrabarti and other noted, Nagaswamy and other noted people, have called out the research at Putnam as dubious. And Vasant Shinde completely rejected the claims made by the excavators and said they lack professional or academic expertise to carry out such an excavation. Very damning indiction from a noted archaeologist over here. But what we are seeing in this exhibit number 2 is that the governments don't seem to be too concerned with trying to look at the history of India as such, but deep interest is shown in constructing a narrative that assists a certain kind of thought over here. Exhibit 3 is more serious. It calls for identity revisionism. So we worked with the Telangana government for some time on their social studies textbooks and trying to see the content from the 6th grade to the 10th grade and try to see what can be revised. So in one of our revisions, this is just a sample that I've taken out of the 150-page report that we made to the Telangana textbook committee. So one of them says, Sultan Mahmud of Ghazni ruled and so on and so forth. His targets were wealthy temples, including that of Somnath. Much of the wealth that Mahmud carried away was used to create a splendid capital at Ghazni. So this was the discussion in chapter 11, page number, paragraph, and so on and so forth. And the issue that we called out was the use of the word splendid. It glorifies the invaders. Use of the phrase wealthy temple has a negative association that it is somehow okay to plunder such temples because they are wealthy. And we proposed a certain revision. I'm glad to say that today the Telangana government changed, the textbook committee changed it to one of the rulers, Sultan Muhammad of Ghazni, ruled from 997 Common Era. He raided northern India many times, plundered and destroyed wealthy temples, including that of Somnath. Much of the wealth that he took, looted, was used to build the capital city at Ghazni. So we ensured that the correct adjectives are used over here so that children don't go away with a false lesson saying that it is okay to take because they're wealthy, we can take it and we can build splendid artifacts, everything's okay. So such a whitewashing is something that we saw again and again in the NCRT and the SCRT textbook, which took inspiration from NCRT textbook. It's not as if the textbook writers in Telangana are doing this. They were borrowing from the NCRT textbooks, which in turn contains toxic content. And this is just one such example of the revisions that we propose. Today we have revisionist authors like this lady, Trishke, who writes on Aurangzeb, and you cannot recognize the man in her description. So we also have a situation today where the media has been infiltrated by hostile forces. Any mass media that you take, I've only taken the example of movies over here, whether it is Hindi movies, Telugu movies, Tamil movies, Kannada movies, Malayalam, or any language of India today, anywhere you go, I'm willing to guarantee to you that obligatorily use Hindu villains. Hindus are shown as venal characters who are either greedy or some kind of terrorist and those kinds of things. You'll also see noble Christian and Muslim characterization. You'll see mocking of Hindu notions, doctrines, ideals, and divinities. And this is widespread in today's cinema, where you can see every Hindu villain obligatorily has a symbolism of Hinduism that you can see. It's an unnecessary addition to the movie and the characterization. But the fact that you put it shows the hostility. It's a hostility towards the Indic civilization that has been done deliberately to normalize a certain kind of thinking. So today, deracination is rampant in India. There's a deep programming of minds that has taken place, and very, very successfully it is happening. For example, children all over India today go around who are orchestrated to say things like say no to fireworks and pollution this Diwali. At the same time, you map onto yourself an alien ideology like Halloween and so on. There is a toxic mix of textbook content and dogma, which forbid Hindu expression. I already talked about some aspect of NCRT. NCRT is all of its texts go about with the who is the oppressor and who is the oppressed. Every aspect of social dynamics in India is reduced in NCRT to the notion of oppressor and oppressed. This person is oppressed by that fellow sitting the first bench of his ancestors and so on. And when such kinds of narratives take place, there is no question of national unity. There is only the amplification of anger and fracture lines. That is what is happening. So we see identity suppression is actively practiced. Here are some examples from a meme that came on the social media. For example, St. Joseph's School, Ratnam, expelled 20 students for chanting Bharat Mata Ki Jai. Hindu girl punished for tilak on her forehead. Hindu girls played Holi and they committed suicide. Hindu students applied Vibhuti and were suspended. Raksha Bandhan was banned and they made to remove Rakhi. Punished for bursting firecrackers. Punished for chanting Jai Sri Ram slogan. Henna, which is removed, rubbed from the hands of a girl at stone. And Hindu boy made to leave school for wearing Ayyappa Mala. So we see this is just a random issue here. And I personally have anecdotes also that adds to this from my own times as a student. Enormous amount of intolerance and identity suppression, actively suppressed. We also see the normalization of demonization and dehumanization of the population. We constantly see that today, where a section of the, not a section, a very, very wide section of media and popular thinking says the suffering of one group of people is irrelevant. It does not register in the radar at all. Whereas the alleged sufferings of another group of people is amplified internationally and so on. So we see this happening all the time, where suffering of a wide section of the population does not register. Voices are gagged. Global nexuses today practice Hindu phobia with impunity. So Aarti Tikku Singh in a tweet, she says, Pakistani Islamists drove me and my community out of Kashmir. Hindu India denied my voice for 30 years. Islamist Ilhan Omar, she gagged me today under the chairmanship of Democrat Congressman Brad Sherman. This is democracy. So even leading journalists in the country are gagged if they want to talk about the truth. Discrimination happens with impunity. Here's a sample advertisement. This is not representative of what is happening all over, but for example, only Christians and Muslims need apply for a Muslim-owned supermarket in Thrissur. The Kerala government, it has launched loan waiver schemes so people convert to Christianity, job reservations, and so on. So discrimination is happening with impunity. And today there is aggressive proselytism and targeted violent acts. So increasingly these people are emboldened. The anti-Indic forces, the people who carry on the war of civilization, is emboldened in hostile activity all over India. One example is the Joshua Project. Joshua Project is leading aggregator of information on how many communities in India are Christianized, how many have to be Christianized, and by people, by language, by region, and so on and so forth. And targeted killings and assassinations take place to push a certain kind of narrative. Internationally, this happens, and here we see Washington Post, where it does a soft sell of terrorism because of global media nexus. It calls this terrorist, Abu Bakr Baghdadi, as an austere religious scholar at the helm of Islamic State. Unbelievable, but this is exactly what takes place in today's nexuses. Compromised media and global media nexus. Once again, Washington Post. that talks very, very loosely about a legislator, an elected person in Indian polity, talks about a Hindu man charged with terrorism. So my concluding remarks, I know, gone very, very quickly, giving a mile-high view with some instances and some notions of the war in Indian civilization. I'd like to point out that historically, we have been a knowledge-based society. I'm asking the question, do we recognize, isolate, and destroy the forces and institutions that normalize genocide, ethnocide, and discrimination? The sad answer is no, we are not doing that. The historical view of Hindu education, heritage, expression, geographic presence shows enormous, relentless trend downwards, and we are moving towards extinction. That is the way I see. From having a practice that spread up to Assyria and other places, we are now Armenia and other places. We are gradually reduced down to very, very small pockets and islands of Hindu expression, literally. Do we recognize a stifling of Hindu expression in its own homeland, India? No, we don't. So today, the Breaking India forces are accelerating thanks to the multiplicative effects of technology and new generations of deracinated people joining the forces. The bottom line is this is not new. We have been having a 3,000 plus year war in the Hindu civilization. So it requires the Indian intellectual to sit back and ask, do we have a trajectory going back to that period of time? Who are we as a people? Whose country is this? Is the identity that is being pushed today, is this the true identity of the nation, or what is our identity? Many unanswered questions are there. So I'd like to conclude my talk at this point by saying that we need to do a lot of homework on who we are and take the relevant steps towards reclaiming who we are. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much for the quick overview. I'm sure you're packed with enough content to last for a whole day and if not more. I think you've just skimmed through it literally. I think if you go into each slide, it's a volume to talk about. I'm sure about it.
Very true.
So maybe you have actually stated a problem statement here. Mm-hmm. But would you also try and guess a few solutions to this? We all know that NCRT and HRD ministry has to change. For the past 6 years, we haven't seen much on that. We always live on hope, and yes, as and when it happens, it happens. But then that apart, what are the broad solutions you're seeing? How do you expect the Hindu organizations to fight this? How do we expect a common Hindu to fight this out? I mean, the forces are riled up against him, like what you showed the charts. So many pressures on him, and he's made to feel guilty being a Hindu. How do you see that this fight has to be taken at an individual level, at an organizational level, at a collective group level, or at a governmental level? At various levels, how do you see this fight to be fought?
Right. So it's a very good question, Giridharji, and like you rightly pointed out, this is not a quick fix band-aid kind of solution to the problems that the Hindu civilization has been facing, or the Indian civilization has been facing for thousands of years. It requires a concerted action at many, many levels. Like you correctly said, from the individual level all the way to the government level, it requires that people have to play a role over here. So the problems, like I pointed out, are not merely the practice of aggressive proselytization. It is not merely the violent actions of a dogma-ridden people. It is not only that. It is also the narration of the ethnocide practiced, internalized, deracinated, and has found expression in our laws, in our constitution, in our day-to-day going about things, in our identity, our view of who we are. So if change has got to come, if we got to take solutions and do that, it's got to come at various levels. And the question is, where does one start? It is an overwhelming uphill task. So I would say there is need to question all of the constitutional provisions that have interpreted in a certain way. I'm not saying change the constitution, but I'd love to have debates happening in the country where we see how are these provisions being interpreted is it fair to the notions of equality for all, no discrimination, the state shall not practice discrimination, all of these other laws, we'll have to see which constitutional provision is going against what. Is there, for example, a propensity by the courts to say that the Hindus are a disparate collection of thought systems, they're not a denomination, therefore I can take any Hindu practice and say that Ayyappa devotees are not a denomination, and therefore they are practicing human rights violation by not allowing women to go over there. Therefore, I can put some laws and describe how they practice their faith. Is that valid? Does it not go against the notion of everybody's got the right to practice their religion with dignity? So is that not violating that? So questions like this. There are people who say that the constitution is good, but it's the interpretation. Where is the interpretation? What do we do? So precedents need to be set, challenged, and interpretations need to be made. And especially with regard to the control of the Hindu institutions, to the Right to Education Act, to several other issues that impact the identity of the dominant civilization of the country, dominant people in the country, one needs to go and see how can we either start the debates or continue the debates or take the judicial activism all the way to the courts and challenge the workings of some of these things, overturn some of the malicious laws that UPA government has come about, brought about as bills. For example, the anti-superstition bill, which only maliciously identifies only Hindu practices as superstitions, but does not touch any of the Abrahamic practices. And there are, God knows how many superstitions there are over there, but it does not do that. So things of this nature. How can laws be set up that discriminate openly? How can you say there has to be a Right to Education Act, but by the way, these groups are excluded from this right to education, and the burden of maintaining the provisions of the law are so great that a Hindu institution cannot afford to be profitable when compared with entrepreneurs from a minority faith. When that happens, the Hindu school entrepreneur is going to close down a school and sell it off to a minority. I have seen that. I've seen that in Bangalore, in my neighborhood, where there was a certain school that had a Hindu chairman. Once a Right to Education came, he could no longer afford to do it, and he sold the school. And guess to whom he sold it? He sold it to some Christian organization. So when you see things of this nature happening, you start asking the questions. What is this Right to Education Act doing? Is it an instrument to really provide education, or is it an instrument to crowd out a certain group of people from the education space? So such debates need to happen. We have to challenge some of these bills that have been brought about in the parliament. We have to reinterpret some of the constitutional provisions and what are they doing, and are there amendments needed to bring it into line with where we are today. So I think at the level of the government, at the level of the judiciary, there are things that can be done. And at the level of groups, Hindu groups and others, we can increase the level of activism and informing people through social media and other conferences and things like that about how these things are impacting their expression. At the level of the individual, we can lodge complaints and other things in schools that practice expression discrimination. That is the one that impacts most of us because our children go to schools, they experience discrimination there. We can exercise our vote once the vote is done to the right people. Third, to hold elected people accountable. Don't let them go. Don't let them go. Hound them constantly and ask them, why is my interest not being taken care of? So the activism needs the participation of people in the democracy. That's our dharma today. Democracy is our dharma. So we need to ramp up our participation in this democracy, make sure our voice is heard, and make sure this activism happens. So no easy answer, Giridharji, to your question. At all levels, there needs to be re-examination. At all levels, we need to find a role for ourselves in changing the narrative. I think it can be done, but then we need to get people out of tamas. We are deeply in tamas in the way we think and operate. So our tamas makes us sit back and relax and say it's somebody else's problem. No, it is your problem. It has come to your doorstep. It has come to your house, and you need to take care of it. Okay.
Thank you. But then one suggestion, I don't know, maybe probably each one of us are at an individual level doing whatever best we are able to conceive. maybe a certain degree of collective effort of people who are really concerned and people who have some degree of knowledge would probably help the cause in a larger way. When I'm saying this, for instance, we see a lot of junk which floats in, social media, right? What happens is we are lampooned by people who call themselves racialists.
Right.
We don't really need to give this, unwanted kind of a narrative. They'll quote anything, and suddenly they say Chanakya said that coronavirus will come. You'll have to do this. Some nonsense. Right. Right. And because Chanakya's name is mentioned, it has a wide publicity. It goes into all the groups and what have you. What is happening is I constantly keep getting people asking me whether this is true, whether there is any truth in this. How do we counter this? How do we answer this? Forget about people who are attacking you. Right. Even the narrative about the Hindu fundamentals, principles, these are so distorted these days. It gets very tough for people to really cipher and see which is true, which is not true.
Very true, very true, very true. I think, Giridharji, we are seeing the end result of the battles that I talked about. The schools have ensured that you will not learn about your heritage. The schools have ensured that you will learn a distorted history and not be able to connect back to your past. Media has ensured that you'll be deracinated and napalm alien ideologies. When these things happen, the civilizational hunger is great in our people. They want to know, but they don't have the knowledge base. Not everybody's got a good enlightened guru who can show them what is correct, what is wrong, and so on. Not everybody is a scholar in history or identity and such things to know what is going on. Common man does not know where to go for knowledge. So all these things that you're talking about, memes and other things that go on internet talking rubbish, these things are eagerly taken up by people at one level. At the second level, the malicious forces that I talked about, who are constantly working to discredit you, they will amplify that message. They will take that message, and this lampooning that you talked about, they will be at the forefront of lampooning, saying all of Hindu intelligentsia thinks of the following. So they take great delight in continuing the civilizational battle by lampooning these fringe messages rather than paying attention to the serious message. So we are seeing an expression of that because we have not invested in the education of people in their traditional heritage. So like you said, where does it start? The problems are so many intertwined problems. You pick on one problem, something else is there, something else is there. So it's an unfortunate situation, but I would say investment in the education is primary over there. And people, groups like yours and many other hundreds of groups in India should continue the message of holding seminars and discussions, taking the message to the common man. The message should not be too complicated. The message should be simple, that just says who we are as a people and what we are. We are a knowledge-based society. Throughout the Indian civilization of the last 10,000 or so years, the rishis have said, go inward, know yourself, dispel the avidya about your existence, understand yourself, tattvamasi. And these are the mahavakyas that our civilization has grown with. So we as a civilization are a knowledge-based civilization. We should enjoin the people to continue on that knowledge, on that quest of knowledge. Don't stop that quest of knowledge. It doesn't matter if you don't have it today. Start. That tweet came that talks on something about some lampooned message of Hinduism. Go behind the truth behind that. Try to do some research. Try to go behind the research. Continue that expression. So we need to make sure that our people internalize this message, that we are not people who blindly take on messages and dogma and say that God told me to do this, therefore I shall do this. It is not that, but we are people who are enjoined to go behind the truth. What is the truth? We are on a quest for truth. We need to emphasize that message. Let people take it as a mantra that I'm not going to believe anything until I have, it's my individual journey. I need to continue. So, sorry, long answer.
Sure. I was just suggesting, I'm taking from what you answered just now. You said people are struggling to find that guru who can explain them some of these concepts, right? So what I was suggesting was people like you and maybe some others would come together, form some kind of a group. Individual maybe not prominent there. Maybe it's 4, 5, 10 people, whoever it is. If you have a single handle, like what the True Indology does, for instance. The handle True Indology does in, what happens is people can bounce off their questions, and then, this group, somebody would answer it. So what happens is the kind of quality of answers you find in Quora or in Wikipedia is all junk. It's all distorted, and you know how it works. So real researchers like you, people who have sufficient knowledge, not everybody can watch a 1 hour, 2 hour video of Raj Vedam to understand an answer for it. They need a quick answer. Somebody said, whatever, putting a mango leaves in the front is just humbug. It's no science, right? Maybe a quick answer, a couple of sentence answers, right? So whatever, people could have some questions. Some of it we could reply. Some probably somebody needs to do a research. I'm just looking at, can we create a group which kind of partly gives solution to people who are thirsting for the real answers.
Right. I concur with you, agree with you, Giridharji. This is again pointing to our civilizational problems. In the past, our civilization supported patronized scholars, rishis and acharyas, and everybody was patronized by local rajas, by the population. So many people patronized them, and they were able to do what they were doing. Today's India, we have been disenfranchised. Scholars, the Indic scholar has been disenfranchised. How many of you know Sanskrit scholars who are in penury, who are in poverty, who don't even have the food to eat? But that is the state of our country. Ever since the Nehru government decided that Sanskrit will not be the medium of instruction in 1950, I think it lost by 1 vote. Ever since that happened, we have gone on a trajectory that rejects the connection of our culture to our past and so on. So scholars today don't have the means to do some of the things you are asking. For example, in my own personal thing, I have a full-time day job as an engineer. I need to provide bread on the table. I can't afford to retire today. So I need to do that. All the talks that I undertake when I go to India, out of my own pocket. There is no agency that supports me, that says, we have done these things for you. I pay for everything out of my own pocket. So I am happy that I'm able to afford these things today. But the point is that thousands of scholars in India and abroad can't afford to do it. Where is the agency to support them? Where is the agency to support them? In the past, we can point to how it was done. Today, where is the agency? I don't know the answer to that. I would love to see some industrialists in India and other places saying, as part of corporate responsibility, they say the Indic civilization narrative identity is super critical for us. Here is a fund. And out of this fund, we will support these scholars for sabbaticals and so on and so forth, make things happen. If such things were to happen, and if groups like yours can play a leading role in creating such institutions, I think our civilization has got things to look up to. Otherwise, it is the superhuman efforts of individuals. I don't want to say about myself, but many people like me and others who got a day job and trying to do these things on the side, create content and disseminate the content with zero support. That is what is happening today. So this is not a good model. It is not sustainable. It is not a good model. The model needs to change.
I fully agree with you. In fact, your bang hit it on the nail. People will give money to all shady causes. But when it comes to a dharmic quest, nobody really wants to give money. People are willing to put money in the hundi, don't pay taxes. But when it really comes for such really serious civilizational matters, nobody is going to fund you. In fact, our chairman, Dr. Hanuman Chaudhary ji, he proposed, like your CSR, corporate social responsibility, he said corporate dharmic responsibility. There should be a fund created which is going to take care of this. I fully agree with you. We need, unless there is a financial support, this is not going to happen. I agree with you.